Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for being with us. You have probably heard the term Sharia, as in Sharia law, before, and we have talked about it on the show several times. But for those unfamiliar with the basic tenets of Sharia law and why it is not only incompatible with our Constitution, but Western civilization in general, we're going to cover the basics on it and talk about how to combat it. Just so you know, several years ago, Tennessee passed a law that made it clear that only the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution can be the basis for law in Tennessee. But that doesn't mean we don't have to worry about it because, like all laws, they are only as good as their enforcement. The Islamists in Tennessee are very well organized, and just like in every other state, they work with the useful idiots on the left in the Democrat Party. Unfortunately, most elected Republicans in Tennessee are too stupid to recognize the threat or too cowardly to confront it. You may have heard about Epic City near Plano, Texas, and the current fight with the state government to stop the building of an all-Muslim neighborhood. You can rest assured all Muslim neighborhoods will follow Sharia law as close as they can, regardless of what the state law says. You may be familiar with the MOA compound, Muslims of America compound outside of Dover in Stewart County. But did you know that a group of Muslims of Afghan origin just opened a mosque and bought land for a cemetery in Etheridge, Tennessee, located in Lawrence County? The fight is here, and we better get on it if we want to keep our state safe and Sharia free. Our guest tonight is well versed on the origins, beliefs, and practices of Sharia, as well as the ultimate long-term goal of Sharia. He also works to help states and counties push back against Sharia. Our guest tonight is Chris Holton of the Center for Security Policy. But first, a word from our sponsor, LifeWave, a unique product that uses light reflection to activate the body's own natural energy, supporting healing, improving performance, and combating aging without drugs or stimulants. Check it out, and we'll be right back with our guest.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back. Now to our guest, Chris Holton. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dave, for having me.
Glad to do it. It's always good to get you on. Had you a few times, and things have really heated up since that last time we had you on, so I thought it might be a good idea to bring you back. Tell the audience briefly about the Center for Security Policy. What is their mission?
Center for Security Policy's mission is to promote peace through American strength. It's a national security organization founded in 1988 by former Reagan administration defense and intelligence officials. And since 9/11, essentially, our orientation has largely focused on the threat from jihad. But now we're also focusing on other threats, again, principally China, and also anarcho-communist threats here in the United States.
Yeah, it seems we're getting more and more of those. You were involved in getting the law passed in Tennessee to ensure that only the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution can be used as the basis for law in Tennessee. How many states passed that or similar laws?
Well, we're up to 15. We passed it in 3 states this session. Florida, Idaho, and Missouri all passed American laws for American courts this year. That's the first time we actually passed 3 separate ALAC bills in 1 year. It's there's a groundswell of support for counter-Sharia initiatives. American laws from American courts is a useful tool for one aspect of the problem. But Dave, as you know, you probably have a copy of Reliance of the Traveler, which is the most widely read book of Islamic sacred law in the world, and it's 1,223 pages long. There's no one law that completely can block out Sharia. Sharia covers all aspects of life, and it covers this life and the hereafter too, if you believe what they believe. There are many different problems with Sharia, and what we have to do is look at the toxic aspects of Sharia and take action to head those off at the pass, so to speak.
Right. And a lot of people I'm sure have heard the term, but are either not really familiar with what it means or maybe they've forgotten. So let's just kind of get a little bit into the basics so that the audience understands how important it is that how important Sharia is in the life of the Muslim, even though much of Sharia impacts non-Muslims.
40% of Sharia is directed at non-Muslims, in fact. If our friend Bill Warner,
right,
of the Center for the Study of Political Islam, did a statistical analysis of Sharia law and found that 40% applied to non-Muslims. It's the only form of religious law out there that applies to people of other faiths. Canon law applies to Catholics, rabbinical law applies to Jews, Sharia applies to Muslims and non-Muslims.
Yeah.
It's
through force.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what does it cover? What are the different things that it covers?
It covers, on the low end of the spectrum, it covers what I would say to you if you sneeze. On the upper end of the spectrum, it covers the conditions under which an Islamic state would go to war. So those, and everything in between. Right. So pick a topic, and I bet you we can find it covered in Sharia texts.
Right.
Sharia is based on the trilogy of Islam. There's a misconception that Islam is all based on the Quran.
Right.
But the reality is there are three important works in Islam. The Quran, which is not the same as their Bible. It's more like a long form 10 Commandments, to be honest with you. The Hadith, which are the traditions and sayings about the Prophet Muhammad written by his contemporaries and those who lived shortly after he died. And the Sirah, which is the 800-page biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And when you're talking about Sharia, the Hadith and the Sirah are actually more important for Sharia than the Quran is, because something called the Sunnah of Muhammad. Muhammad is considered the perfect example for all Muslims to follow. Muhammad either said to do this, or Muhammad did something or did not do something, and Muslims are directed to follow his example. So when it came time to codifying Sharia, they based it on the life of Muhammad. For instance, in the Quran, there's nothing in the Quran that says you got to pray towards Mecca 5 times a day. That was something that was developed as part of the Sunnah of Muhammad. Some of the other things that are part of the Sunnah of Muhammad, violent jihad, because, Muhammad became a violent warlord in the latter part of his reign, and he carried out a military campaign about every 6 weeks for the last 12 years of his life.
Wow.
So that provides the sunnah for violent jihadists to today. Muhammad had multiple wives. That provides the basis for polygamy in Islam. Of course, they don't call it polygamy, but in our law, we call it polygamy. Zakat, which is a form of taxation in Islam, can, in some schools of jurisprudence, it must go to all 8 acceptable destinations. And number 7 is those fighting in the way of Allah for which there is no allotment on an army roster, which just sounds like irregular warfare, supporting terrorism. And that's hundreds of years old, and yet that's how long this type of warfare has been around in Islam and in Sharia. So these are all part of the Sunnah of Muhammad, and they're all part of Sharia today. I mean, we don't have enough time to cover everything. Right. Female genital mutilation is considered the Sunnah of Muhammad. It's not required under Sharia, but it is highly encouraged. And this is a quote from Reliance to the Traveler: as a courtesy to the husband. And so, and it says in Reliance to the Traveler that it is part of the Sunnah of Muhammad. So these practices that are all part of Sharia are all based on the life of Muhammad.
On the female genital mutilation, I know that Tennessee passed a law against it several years ago.
Yes.
But, you never hear anything about it. I guarantee you it's happening. And I'm sure that it was I'm not sure exactly who was assigned to monitor that, to make sure that it's not happening, or who was assigned, or what agency was created for them to report it to, or they just had to go to their local police, which would, for a young woman still under her family's control, that would be hard to do. But we passed it. I wonder if we're enforcing it, and I'm sure it's happening here and in other states as well.
Yeah, and I can tell you a story about that. Our general counsel at the Center for Security Policy is an attorney named Stephen Gillet, and he has written the statute in several states outlawing female genital mutilation. And at the end of every year, any attorney will tell you, and I'm not an attorney, but every attorney must take continuing legal education classes. And they all wait till the end of the year to get their continuing legal education obligation done. And he took a class one year in child abuse. And it was taught by an assistant district attorney in the state that he's in. And it just so happened that the legislative session before, Stephen had written the law that passed making female genital mutilation a predicate crime under that state's RICO law. And so this woman who was teaching the course, the CLE course, talked briefly about female genital mutilation, and Stephen raised his hand and he said, "Did you know that it's a predicate crime under RICO?" And she had no idea. She was teaching the course, and she was an assistant district attorney. So yeah, there is a education challenge for a lot of these things that we need to educate law enforcement and the criminal justice system that these laws, because very often they don't even know that the laws exist. I mean, there's so many laws on the books. I mean, it's not an indictment of them. They have plenty to do without this. But there is definitely an education challenge when it comes to, some of these crimes that, material support for terrorism. Most states, including Tennessee, have laws against terrorism and material support for terrorism. And zakat can be considered, depending on how it is implemented, material support for terrorism.
Right.
So that's another one that needs to, you hardly ever see reports of states prosecuting for terrorism or material support for terrorism, despite the fact that 36 states and Washington, D.C. have laws on the books for that. So,
and now zakat is, I guess, part of, but not the entirety of, Sharia compliant finance, which my guess is there's a lot of financial institutions that do Sharia compliant finance, but how many states know what to look for and even understand that Sharia compliant finance, a lot of that is likely going to fund terrorism.
It can be. I wouldn't use the term likely, because very often the institution will pass that responsibility through to the investor. So if you own, if you have a deposit in a Sharia compliant bank, they will remind you that you need to make your zakat payment based on your assets, but they won't necessarily automatically deduct from your account the zakat. Now, the institution itself, as part of its assets, has to make a zakat payment, but it's a little bit more complex than just an easy to find smoking gun.
Right. But I mean, as a rule, people probably would not want to invest in a Sharia compliant financial vehicle. I mean, if you oppose that kind of stuff, I don't know why you would invest in it, but my guess is most people don't have, it says it's Sharia compliant, and they don't think twice about it. I mean, I know we have American companies and other companies that are not necessarily from Islamic nations that have Sharia compliant finance vehicles. So
there was a movement several years ago to promote Sharia compliant finance to non-Muslims. They've been doing that in Britain for some time now. And that's something we probably ought to talk about, is what's going on in Western Europe. But the Sharia compliant finance industry sought to promote Sharia compliant finance because the purpose of Sharia compliant finance is to promote Sharia. That is the purpose of Sharia compliant finance.
Yep.
And so they were promoting it as ethical investing. And the way that they justified that is they said, we don't invest in companies that are in the alcohol or liquor business. We don't invest in different companies that are considered abhorrent, pornography, things like that.
Right.
Which is fine. What they don't tell you is, we don't invest in companies that do business in Israel.
Right.
They exclude them, or
they don't tell
like
you where
that.
that money can end up. They don't tell you
Right.
where that money can ultimately end up.
Right.
And who it can end up funding. Now, for any Muslim, Sharia is not an option. I mean, it's if you're following Islamic law, you have to follow Sharia. It's not there's not the Sharia Muslims and the non-Sharia Muslims. There's only Islam, and if you're actually following it, then you're going to be Sharia compliant, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. It is not a smorgasbord or cafeteria plan for people to pick and choose what aspects they're supposed to follow. Now, that having been said, I personally know Muslims who don't follow Sharia and came to the United States to get away from Sharia.
Right.
Now, but from the Islamic standpoint, those would be considered bad Muslims.
Yep.
Kind of like being a bad Christian that doesn't go to church on Sunday, right? Yep. So if you're a pious Muslim, if you're a good Muslim, you follow Sharia to the utmost of your ability. So it's not an option, and there is no separation of Sharia and Islam. In fact, Sharia is the code by which Islam operates. It's the rule book.
Yep. Everything, every day. It covers everything. There's no separation of church and state. It's all.
Yeah, that concept does not exist in Islam at all. The separation of church and state. Of course, it's not in our Constitution either, but we have an establishment clause.
Right.
But there's a common misconception that a mosque is a church. A mosque is kind of like a church, but it's also the courthouse,
Military
the
headquarters.
school, the National Guard Armory,
Yep, all in one.
all of that. And so that's where everything is centered, and that has been the case since the time of Muhammad.
Yep.
And the role of the mosque, from a practical standpoint, is symbolic of Islam.
Yep.
Islam, I hear people say that Islam is not a religion. I don't agree with that statement. If you listen to what Muslims say, they'll tell you that Islam is not just a religion.
Right.
It's an entire civilization.
Yep.
And that's why so many aspects of Sharia have nothing to do with religion, and therefore should not be protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Yep. Under any circumstances. Female genital mutilation should not be protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Things like that. Yep. Beating your wife, which is in Sharia, striking your wife, which is in Sharia, that's not protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
Right. Some other things they do with it is, if you can pull that slide back up, please. You've got the killing of apostates from Islam. Now, right. Some people might think that just happens overseas. There's actually a group here in Tennessee. It's called the Crescent Project, and it's out of, I think, Nashville. And Matt Bonner used to run it. I guess he's still running it. But several years ago, we had people who were born Muslim and had converted to Christianity, and now they were having to hide out from their families. Okay, they were here they were here in Tennessee, and they had to hide from their families. And that's one of the things, that was one of the missions of the Crescent Project, was to help those people. But talk to some of them, and they were definitely afraid that if their dad or brothers ever found them, that they'd be killed.
That's absolutely the case. Very often, what are termed honor killings, right, are actually a case of when a female Muslim decided to drift away from the religion, either renouncing the religion altogether or just not living according to its tenets. And usually here in the West, that means dressing in Western attire, yep, and following Western practices and culture. And very often, when a young woman like that is murdered by her father, it's called an honor killing, but in reality, it's him carrying out the sentence for apostasy. Because if you read Sharia law texts about apostasy, that sentence can be carried out by anyone who's in a position to do so. It doesn't have to be carried out by a government. So they're essentially giving permission, and have for hundreds of years, to family members, male family members, to enforce Sharia on female family members.
Yeah, and that's happened here in the States. You hear about it every now and then I imagine there's some cases where that's really what happened, but maybe you don't get the details.
Absolutely, I think you're right about that.
Yeah. So we mentioned about 40% of Sharia does not apply to Muslims. And you also mentioned Western Europe. Of course, you don't necessarily have to look to Western Europe. You can now, or Eastern Europe for that matter, you can now look to New York, and you can look to Dearborn and some other places. So how does Sharia impact non-Muslims in areas where it's practiced?
Well, there is a pressure for accommodation in these places. When Muslim populations start to grow, and especially when Muslim Brotherhood organizations become prominent in the Muslim community in the West, and this has occurred in France, this has occurred in the UK, this has occurred, and as bad as Dearborn is, these places are much worse. Right. In terms of my personal opinion is that Western Europe is lost, that the demographics are such that without massive deportations that Western Europe as we know it is lost. It's just a matter of time at this point. And it doesn't take a situation where they have a majority of the population. What can happen is you see that a majority or a large percentage of the military-age male population is Muslim in a Western country. Show me a Muslim country where there is a large percentage of military-age males in a tense situation where it's not just chaos.
Right.
So that's what's happening slowly. There's two types of jihad. There's violent jihad and there's civilization jihad.
Yep.
And the analogy is the frog in the pot.
Right.
If you take a frog and throw him into a pot of already boiling water, he'll jump right out. If you put a frog in a pot of cool water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog will sit there and boil to death.
Yep.
And that's civilization jihad. And that's what's been happening in Europe for some time now.
Yeah, I'd say they're just about boiling now. I would say some places are, France. France has had no-go zones in places like Paris for 20 years. Germany Germany is pretty much toast. UK, I don't know if UK can salvage their country.
I don't think they can. The demographics, the fact is the Muslims are having babies.
Yep.
And we're not.
Yep. It's the war of the womb too. That's part of what they do. They're going to outbreed you.
If you go on YouTube, you can find many videos, and they're nothing but slideshows of churches that have been turned into mosques. And this is part of their doctrine, by the way. I mean, the largest mosque in the world was at one time a large church in a city called Constantinople,
yep,
which was conquered by the Muslims, and it's now called Istanbul. And that's what they do. They take over other faiths' houses of worship, and they convert them to mosques. And it's a form of conquest. And they have done this, and it shows that this is not just a political or a legal battle. It's not enough just to pass laws and vote for Republicans. This is a cultural and a spiritual battle.
Yep.
And when you lose sight of who you are and you abandon your faith, you become vulnerable. And that is what happened in Europe. Those folks abandoned their faith and forgot who they were a long time ago. And so it was the Muslims just walked right in and started the process.
Yeah.
And they haven't really been opposed until very recently. Yeah. And now it's too late, in my opinion.
Well, they walked in and then they were shipped in. I mean, if you look at this immigration that's gone on around the world the last several years, that did not occur naturally. Somebody is behind that, putting all these huge Muslim populations into Europe and into America. That's by design. And
it was by design in Europe with a different justification than what we saw here. But you're right. In Europe, they flat out said, we need to bring in people for labor because we don't have the population for it. We need to bring these people in. We have to have them. So we need to bring them in. And it was civilization suicide.
Right.
Because now what they have a large Muslim population that are on the dole. They're not working. They're on public assistance.
Yeah.
I mean, a ridiculous percentage of the population is on public assistance. Yeah. So it didn't work, and they're losing their culture, and they're losing their country as a result.
Yep. Sweden is now the rape capital of Europe, and it used to be one of the safest places.
They've actually started to turn that back. In Sweden, they're offering incentives for people to go back to where they came from. whether they can, accomplish it, but they've recognized the problem, and if you look at the rape statistics, they peaked a few years ago. They're still much higher than they were
right before they had all the
pre
Muslims.
Invasion of, but they're doing something about it. It
Right.
remains to be seen. But look, Sweden's a great place. All right, nothing against Swedes. If any Swedes are watching, but Sweden is not as important as the UK and Germany and France.
Right.
And Sweden can win the battle, and if the UK, France, and Germany lose the battle, it's not going to amount to a hill of beans that Sweden, turn the tide.
Yeah. When you say battle, I think literally, especially in the UK and France, possibly at least parts of Germany. I think it'd have to be literally literal battle. I mean, I think they would
Well, I don't
have
know how
to.
you can do that because they don't have private ownership of firearms in those places.
Well, I'm talking about their militaries. I'm saying their militaries would have to go in. Their military and their police will have to go in and clear out these no-go zones.
Well, the problem is that a lot of these militaries have a percentage. Remember, military-age males,
True.
more and more
True.
are so it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how that would work.
Yeah. So NATO will, in the not too distant future, be the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization if it's not already.
Well, let's hope not. But
Yeah. So.
wow.
In America, we're undergoing primarily civilization jihad. Now, that's not to say we haven't had attacks. We've had attacks here in Tennessee. Had an attack in Chattanooga several years ago. We had an attack, I want to say it was in Nashville or Memphis, the Carlos Bledsoe case. Seems like
That was actually in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Okay, but he was
also,
from Tennessee. That's right.
He was converted, or as they would say, he reverted to Islam at Tennessee State University.
Yeah. Okay.
But he actually carried out an attack in Nashville. He threw a Molotov cocktail at a house that he thought belonged to a rabbi. The rabbi had moved 6 weeks before, and the house was empty. And it was a brick house, and the Molotov cocktail ignited, but it didn't. The fire didn't spread. It went out by itself. So it was never even reported. It wasn't until after they arrested Carlos Bledsoe, who had become Abdul Hakim Muhammad,
Right.
that he self-reported that he had done that, but they didn't even know what it had been because it had been 6 weeks since the rabbi had moved. It was an abandoned house. Nobody really made the connection at the time.
So, so there is that. And, I've really been concerned during this fight with Iran. I've been concerned that we're going to have attacks here. Fortunately, we haven't yet. Hopefully we don't. But, it's definitely something to be concerned about, especially when you consider we have a pretty large population of Muslims, not just in Tennessee. Texas has obviously got a problem. Michigan and New York now has a Muslim/socialist mayor. But they are, overall in America, they are using a civilization jihad where they're infiltrating and taking over institutions. Think about it, since 9/11, how many mosques have been added to America? How many more Muslims are in America now? How many more Muslims are in elected office now? That's the mode they're going in America now. Now, they don't have to have, as you said, a huge majority to start becoming a real threat, a violent physical threat. Even in the countries in Europe where they have a higher percentage, they don't have a huge majority. They just got enough people and enough military-age males. They're wreaking havoc, even though they're not 50% of the population or a majority. They're still fairly small overall, but doesn't take a lot.
Yeah, it's frightening to think that with this relatively small percentages that they have today and the conditions that exist now, how bad can it get? Yep. It can get much worse.
Yeah. And all the Muslims are bound to do some type of jihad. Jihad doesn't mean go blow somebody up, but all of them they're all required to do some form of jihad, correct?
Well, Muslims who cannot perform jihad for various reasons are still obligated to support jihad with money, and that is the whole system of zakat, where they're required to set aside 2.5% of their assets every year, and there are 8 acceptable destinations of zakat. Now, one of the 8 is those fighting in the way of Allah, like I mentioned before.
Right.
Now, some schools of jurisprudence say that you have to divide it evenly between all 8. Others say you can pick and choose. So not everybody that gives to zakat ends up supporting jihad. It depends on the school of jurisprudence that is operating for that system that they're working through.
Yeah. One of the things that concerns me too is, while we're fighting Iran, we have this cozy relationship with Qatar. And Qatar, their banks are known for funding terrorism. And we apparently want them to invest over here, which concerns me because if they invest over here, they're going to infest. And the Trump administration just doesn't seem to get that. They seem to think that they're the good Muslims. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a serious problem. The Qataris have been throwing money around here in the United States for some time, particularly when it comes to colleges and universities. Yep. They had, Texas A&M University had a campus in Qatar until very recently. Tulane University in New Orleans, which has the highest percentage of Jewish students of any private university in the United States, took a ton of money from Qatar post-Katrina. And now they had a riot after October 7th on campus.
At Tulane?
And so, yes, sir.
Oh, wow.
Yes, sir. And so those are just 2 examples. But Qatar's been throwing a lot of money around. And you know as well as I do that has been an outlet for adversaries to gain influence in the United States. China's been playing that game as well. Yeah. And so Qatar is one of those countries that you can say plays both ends against the middle. We have a big base in Qatar. Yep. Central Command has a huge complex there and a major air base there. So they have cover of being an ally. Yeah. And at the same time, if you recall, they recognized the Taliban and gave safe haven to Taliban leadership and diplomatic recognition of the Taliban after we overthrew the Taliban.
Yeah, well, and they have Hamas. They were funding Hamas.
Right. They were Hamas's main benefactor. Yeah. When Iran started to get pressure from the United States, once we quit playing footsie with them.
Yeah.
Once we quit sending them pallets of money.
Yeah. And, that's another thing, too. A lot of people seem to forget Hamas's charter. It goes back to 88. Hamas was not something that started in the last 10 or 12 years. Their charter initially was all about the destruction of Israel. And, they have never been friendly towards us. Right. So Hamas has always been a terrorist organization.
One of the 2 guys that founded Hamas was also one of the co-founders of Al-Qaeda. Same guy. Yeah. All right. So, that tells you everything you need to know about Hamas.
Right. And, we talked about Sharia compliant finance. And just as a reminder for some of the people that may have forgotten, here's how stupid some of our elected officials are. Around 2012, when Bill Haslam was our governor, he appointed a lady named Samar Ali, who lives in Waverly, Tennessee, to be the economic advisor for foreign development. I think that's probably not the correct term, but at the state level.
I remember that.
And, word got out and we're like, hey, Haslam just appointed a Sharia compliant expert to this position. And there was there was some hell raised about it, so to speak. Bill Haggerty, now senator, defended her. Oh, she's great. The people that are complaining about her are just a bunch of bigots. Well, we do know that her husband at one time, and of course she was married after this. He has links to the banks in Qatar. Okay, I mean, I can't say that he's funded terrorism, but it's certainly concerning that he's, has those links. And then her father, Suba Ali, longtime board member, and I think he was one of the founders of the Jerusalem Fund, which their main focus is BDS, boycott, divestment of Israel. And I mean, they are pro-Gaza, they are pro-Palestinian.
You've jogged my memory. The bottom line is there was no particular qualification that this woman had that would put her in that position. She was put in that position to pander to the Muslim community for some reason.
Yep.
And for a governor of Tennessee to do that was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I say that to remind for the people to understand our Republican Party in Tennessee. I mean, the Democrats in Tennessee are communists. I mean, let's just bottom line, they're communists. But you can't trust the judgment of the Republicans in Tennessee because they've proven over and over again they don't have a clue on these kind of things.
Look, the problem has always been the Republicans. I hate to say that. We know where the Democrats stand.
True.
The problem is you get states like Tennessee, where basically in Tennessee now, in order to get elected, and look, this is not just Tennessee, so
Right. Yeah.
I'm not indicting Tennessee, but to get elected in Tennessee, you almost have to have an R after your name now.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And so it means less to have an R after your name when everyone has to have one. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
So that's a problem. That having been said, one of the things that's been emerging that my colleague Kyle Scheidler has done a tremendous amount of work on is this red-green axis. Yep. The support for Hamas in particular, but also other aspects of the global jihadist movement by groups like Antifa. We saw after October 7th, 2023 attack in Israel, all of a sudden there was tens of thousands of people around this country marching in the streets in support of Hamas. And that happened on college campuses. I told you about what happened on Tulane's campus. There was a riot.
Yep.
In the wake of that riot, Antifa set up a autonomous zone like they had done in Seattle on Tulane campus.
Wow.
And there's a whole story behind this. And look, the significance of that is that Tulane has a higher percentage of Jewish students than any campus in the United States. 44% of the student body is Jewish. And so Antifa sets up this autonomous zone right on the front of campus, and it looks like they're there to stay. They made a mistake, though, because we had just gotten a new governor, Governor Landry, and in the middle of the night, because Tulane actually called the New Orleans Police Department and asked them for help, and New Orleans police said, "There's nothing we can do. It's too volatile a situation. We just have to let it play out." So they called Governor Landry, and he sent 40 state troopers there at 2 a.m, blaring static and loud rock music, which would drive me crazy because I like country music. But and they got online and they just swept them up, and they were gone within a couple hours.
Wow.
That's the way you handle that. But the thing is, I drove by that autonomous place. I was in New Orleans at the time, and there were women in hijabs stopped on the side of the street handing out cases of water to little Antifa guys who were beating drums and doing things that stupid hippies do. I mean, this was the red-green axis in action.
Yeah.
And so, we saw in Texas several months ago a terrorist attack occur. Antifa attacked a private prison facility and shot a prison guard in the neck.
Yep.
And it hasn't gotten enough publicity, to be honest with you, but you know, there were members of Antifa who were convicted on terrorism charges in that case.
Good.
And so, Antifa has gone violent, has gone kinetic. They don't just, go in the streets and throw soup cans and frozen water bottles at people now. They're escalating,
yeah.
and it's a big problem.
Let's look at some.
You all had something similar on the grounds of the Capitol, as I recall.
Yep.
Back in those days.
Yeah, we did. It's been a few years, and I didn't think that we. I thought we let that go too far. To be honest with you, I thought we should have cracked down harder. We've got some statements made by jihadis about their intents. We're going to pull those up here onto the screen and talk about a few of those, and then I want to talk about, hey, what are some of the things we can do about this? So if we can find that, there we go.
Yeah, I included these in my presentation. In the slides that you're showing are part of a kind of a Sharia 101 presentation that I give around the country. And these are quotes from jihadi leaders about the importance of Sharia to them. And it's very revealing that show the connection between Sharia and jihad and the importance of Sharia. And this is a quote by Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the successor to Osama bin Laden after bin Laden was killed by the SEALs. And this is a quote. And it's Zawahiri was kind of like the ideologue for
right.
Al-Qaeda when bin Laden was alive. And so he wrote a lot about Islamic doctrine and these things. And he makes it clear in this quote that Sharia is everything to them. I went to a Sharia compliant finance conference at Harvard Law School back in 2009. And I had a member of a Muslim Brotherhood organization. I asked him what Sharia was. He didn't know who I was. And he said, it's the path on which we walk. And I think that's a pretty honest answer, but it's not a complete answer.
Right.
Because, if you don't know what Sharia, if you don't have some inkling of what Sharia actually is, the path on which we walk
doesn't tell you anything.
Doesn't tell you much. But if you study a little bit about Sharia, and the guy tells you the path on which we walk, it shows you that, yeah, it's their roadmap.
Yeah, it's a duty. It's not an option. It's a duty, and that the goal is either to conquer the infidel, which is anybody who's not Muslim, and you're going to convert, or you're going to be killed, or maybe depending on, you might just get a chance to be a second-class citizen. You might just get a chance to be a dhimmi and pay an additional tax and not really be a citizen and basically be subjugated. Those are your options.
And this guy's no longer with us. This was the former head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed by the Israelis in an airstrike. This is a quote of him about Sharia. From the point of view of ideology in Sharia, we are required to establish Allah's rule over any part of this earth, regardless of the particularities or details. So that's it, They don't hide what they're up to.
Yeah. And they're getting bolder here. I mean, we're hearing things now by them in America that we didn't necessarily hear several years ago. They're getting bolder.
Yeah, but I'll also say this. We're seeing responses from elected officials.
Yeah, and that's the good thing, because I never thought I would hear and see some of the things that have been said by, first off, I didn't think we had too many elected officials that had enough sense to know what was going on, and then enough backbone. I mean, Tuberville, Andy Ogles, Chip Roy, and there's others that are speaking up.
Yeah, I really like Tuberville. I think he's going to be the next governor of Alabama, by the way. And but I spend a lot of time in Texas these days. And you know, we've been active on the legislative front in Texas, I don't know, 15 or more years, as long as we were active in Tennessee.
Right.
Yep. And you couldn't get any elected official to speak of in Texas to acknowledge the threat. They were all just drinking the politically correct Kool-Aid. And now, I mean, they've designated CARE as a terrorist organization. They've done a lot of things. They've come a long way.
Yeah, so, every state should do that. I think we got one more statement to pull up there that we'll take a look at real quick. Oh, okay.
This is the original, the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who died in 1989. And he talks about, what Sharia is. And I'm not going to read this whole quote to you, but your viewers can see it. What he's basically saying there is it covers everything.
Yeah.
All the needs of man. That's what he said. All the needs of man. Yep. So that's when I say everybody's looking for one silver bullet law to slay the Sharia dragon. It's just not the way it works, unfortunately. I don't know if I've told this story on your show before or not, but in 2010, the state of Oklahoma passed State Question 755, which was a ballot initiative to make it a constitutional amendment in Oklahoma that basically said no Sharia in Oklahoma. And our legal scholars told us that it was flawed because it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution and the Establishment Clause of the Constitution by singling out one form of religious law like it did. And sure enough, after it was passed, with 75% of the vote, after it was passed, a Reagan-appointed judge struck it down in a court ruling in federal court. And then in an appeals court, a three-judge panel, I think it was a three-judge panel, but an appeals court panel upheld that judge's ruling. And it was only until after that that the legislature in Oklahoma switched to American laws for American courts and passed that law, 2013, I think it was.
Right.
But the thing is, you got to be smart about this. You can't just work hard. You got to work smart. And everybody, I saw a lot of bills this past session that's just ending in most states, looking a lot like State Question 755 in Oklahoma from back in 2010. And, I talked to a lot of legislators and tried to explain to them. And fortunately, I think in every single case, they switched the language to language that would be upheld in court, because we don't want to give the other side a victory. And if you pass a bad law and CARE and the ACLU band together and they sue to have that law overturned, they're going to claim that it was overturned not because it was a bad law, but because it's against the Constitution to go after Islam at all, which is not the case.
Right. Yeah. Well, I could do a whole show and on what's wrong with the court and their interpretations, but we won't go in that tonight. I think let's just say I have contempt of court for some of their insanity. We got a couple more quotes we'll put, and then I want to get to what do we do about it. So here's another one from.
All right, this guy Terry Lee Lowen was a convert to Islam from Kansas, and he plotted to blow up one of the international airports. I don't know if it was Wichita or Topeka, but he was arrested before he could carry out his plot.
Right.
And this is just a new convert to Islam who had gone jihadi real quick, and the justification he had for his actions was with
Yeah,
Sharia.
yeah. I'll just go ahead and read this one. I've been. This says, this is the guy talking. I've been studying subjects like jihad, martyrdom operations, and Sharia law. I don't understand how you can read the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and not understand that jihad and its implementation of Sharia is absolutely demanded of all Muslims. Yeah, it's demanded. It's not suggested. It's not optional. It's not you get extra credit. It's it's demanded. That's the way they see it.
They don't hide. They don't hide their intentions, and they don't hide their philosophy and their ideology and their doctrine.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah. And you know, they really have not been all that stealthy. They've been, you know, I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood's pretty, you know, pretty slick, but you know, Bill Warner and other people have been putting out these facts for years. And,
Right.
and your organization has put this stuff out. But like you said, politicians, elected officials, people that take an oath to uphold the Constitution, people take an oath to, you know, that are supposed to be looking out for the population, for the people, just didn't have the backbone to speak up and say, hey, look, there's an issue here. You know, we have to do something. Okay, we don't, and I kind of like the way Bill Warner put it. You know, I really don't care if they pray 5 times a day, but when they want to pray over the loudspeaker and force everybody to hear it, and when they want to block the road and shut everything down, that's an issue. And
That's a political statement. That's not a religious activity. And you know, Bill Warner is a national treasure as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
And his work, you can go on Amazon. He's got an Amazon store, Center for the Study of Political Islam.
Yep.
I encourage everyone to buy every book he ever wrote.
Get Sharia. If you don't get anything else, get Sharia for non-Muslims. It's a thin book, and it
You
covers
mean this one?
Yeah, that one. Absolutely. That's the one. If you don't know anything, just read that one. That will tell you all you need to know, to be honest with you. So I think that, you know, they've laid it out of what their intentions are. We do finally have some people realizing it and trying to do something about it. Now, as far as the Center for Security Policy and yourself, you know, I saw you recently on a panel with the National Association of Christian Legislators. And so what are you guys doing? What's the security policy doing with them, and what are you trying to help them with?
Well, the National Association of Christian Lawmakers was founded by a guy named Jason Rapert. Now, when Jason Rapert was a senator in the Arkansas State Senate, he was the author of American Laws for American Courts and the author of Andy's Law in Arkansas. So our issues that we deal with at the center have always been important to him. And when he founded this organization a few years ago, he had been encouraging me to get involved, get the center involved with the organization, and we've started to do that. And he has connected us with legislators around the country, and he has put on webinars online as well as done in-person meetings about this threat and, you know, what can be done about it to educate legislators around the country. And one thing I'm detecting is a bad word, but one thing that is apparent is that there is much more concern today. Yeah. I think largely because of what happened in this country in the wake of October 7th, but also because of Epic City in Texas and other things. There's much more concern about the threat from Sharia and jihad today than there was a dozen years ago.
Yeah. It seems like 9/11 came and went, even though we went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and people just, there was a disconnect. It's like, oh, well, you know, the bad guys aren't here. Or there's just the radicals, which there's no such thing as radical Islam. There's only Islam. And that's one of the things that we keep having to remind people of, especially people in positions of power.
You could do a whole show on what happened with regard to Iraq and Afghanistan, and the the most important principle in warfare, according to von Clausewitz, who has his principles of warfare, is the principle of the objective. You have to have a clear objective that you communicate to the populace, to the people, and to the troops. And very early on, in retrospect, George W. Bush lost sight of any objective. And as a result, that's how you get forever wars, because you lose sight of what you're trying to do. And once you lose sight of what you're trying to do, you have no purpose. And that was bad leadership. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's just.
Well, you had a whole succession of generals, and I understand the generals still answer the commander-in-chief, but you had all those years when there was no plan to win the war. You just had a plan for your rotation and to, bring back as many people safely as you can and complete what your missions are. But as far as an end game, there didn't seem to be a plan for an end game.
Well, clearly, it has to be a two-way street, and there has to be it has to come from the people in uniform as well as the political commanders, the commander-in-chief, and there was a definite disconnect that occurred, and it's a shame. It's a doggone shame.
So, at the Center for Security Policy, in reference to this issue, what can people look to the center for? What can they? What kind of resources do you have?
Well, you're showing our website. We have a variety of programs that we have. We have Kyle Scheidler, who is the head of our counterterrorism and homeland security program, who does law enforcement training around the country, free of charge, and he's been doing a tremendous amount of traveling around the country. Most recently, doing training on Antifa, because in that terrorism trial in Texas that I mentioned, he was the expert witness for the federal government. If you remember, just a few years ago, Christopher Wray, who was then the director of the FBI, said that Antifa didn't exist. It was just an idea. If you remember, he said that.
Lord. And,
all this time, Kyle is studying Antifa and reading their stuff, and he knows that that's just a lie.
Right.
And so fast forward to just the last couple of years, when it came time for the federal government to prosecute Antifa for terrorism, they sought out Kyle to come and be their expert witness, and they got convictions. So anyway, as Kyle, we have a lot of other good people.
Are there specific things in terms of fighting back against the Islamists and training the law enforcement on that, training local community
Well, Kyle
leaders?
does that as well. Kyle does that as well. He's been doing that for years. And so, we did a program on Sharia and Jihad for the Southern States Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, which had law officers from Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, and South Carolina, all in one room. That was fairly recently. I don't want to disclose where.
Yeah, that's fine.
Security reasons. But
so a county or state, either one, could contact you on the site and say, hey, we'd like
absolutely.
to have you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And we don't charge a dime. We're a nonprofit organization, and our charter says we can't take any government money. Okay. Because we lose our independence if we do. So when we go into a police department or a sheriff's office to give them training on these issues, we don't take a dime, and we don't ask for a dime. And of course, there's many forms of legislation that can be implemented on the state level. There's a lot to be done on the state level.
Right.
Much more, in fact, on the state level than on the federal level, because the federal level, the wheels turn much too slowly.
Right.
It just takes forever to pass something through Congress.
Yeah. Would you guys speak to a private group if a private group wanted you to come out and speak?
I'm headed to speak to a private group Friday night.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to tell you where, but
Okay.
in a state I don't live in, and then I do that at least twice a month.
Okay.
So yeah, and I've spoken in Tennessee before.
Yeah. Well, that's where I first met you, was in Tennessee. I think up at the legislature. So, well, hey, any closing thoughts?
I just appreciate your work, and I appreciate you having me on again. This is a real good exercise for me in communication, because I need to get better at communicating on these issues.
Well,
and I appreciate you having me and spreading the word on this.
Well, hey, thank you for coming on, and thank you for what you do, and we'll definitely have you back. And might even see about getting you out here to Tennessee. Maybe if might have a private organization that might want to do that.
You don't have to twist my arm, especially if there's barbecue involved.
Oh, hey, barbecue, Tennessee. I think we can arrange that somehow.
I was hoping.
Okay. Hey, take care. You have a good night. Like I say, I got a little more ground to cover. You're welcome to stay to the end, but I know you've got a lot of things going on.
I got to pop off, but thank you very much. Have a great rest of your show.
You too. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Now it's time for a short tribute to one of the good guys in our state legislature, Representative Bud Halsey, who is getting ready to retire. It's time for a special informer report. If you've watched, hold on a second. There we go. If you have watched this show much over the last nearly 3 years we've been on, you probably noticed that I don't have much respect for our state legislature as a whole, and I have some real contempt for certain members. But there are a few really good ones that try to do the right thing and have taken on some very important issues that are key to restoring our state's proper position in the republic and protecting our rights in Tennessee. Often the legislation they support is opposed by the governor or other so-called members of the leadership. Representative Bud Halsey from the 2nd District is one of the very few legislators that not only understands the Constitution, but has attempted to uphold it, most notably through his legislation to pass a process bill for nullification of unconstitutional federal laws and edicts. He and Senator Bowling have carried nullification legislation for the last 4 years to no avail, and much criticism, as well as being undermined by our constitutionally inconsistent AG, Jonathan Skrmetti. It was Representative Halsey's stated intention to continue pushing for this very important piece of legislation that led to the creation of TNCSS, which is Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty, by Karen Bracken and myself to create a statewide network of advocates for the passage of this legislation and education on the topic and related sovereignty issues. His presentation before a House committee in 2023 should be required viewing for all students, teachers, and legislators for that matter. You're going to see it right now in just a minute. He's going to give you a short history lesson. But this is the kind of stuff that we need, people that understand our Constitution the way he does, and we need people that'll stand up for it. So just pay attention for the next few minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee. I appreciate it. I will try not to be long. That is difficult for me, but I will do my best. As you know, in the formation of this country, when you had states before there was any central or federal government, they had their own charters and they did their own business. And they got together and they said, there are some onerous things that we have to deal with. It would be good if we had a federal government that could take care of some things. So they got together and they said, let's form a federal government. But they wanted to make sure in the formation of this federal government that there was no mistake that this federal government could only have a very limited delegated power that they gave it. And they wrote a constitution, and a lot of people think the Constitution was written to establish and bestow rights, but it was not. Because government cannot bestow rights. God bestows rights. Government can either protect them and defend them or take them away. So they established a constitution, I think, for the primary reason to create big chains to chain down the federal government so that they only operated in the venue with the delegated powers that they were given. It turns out to be very interesting because when they also wrote this Constitution, they said we're going to divide it up into 3 branches, a horizontal system of separation of powers. They said we'll have a presidential side or a president that's going to be with the executive branch. And then we'll have a legislative branch that makes law that deals with just the delegated power things that we gave you. Now, by the way, what were those things? Well, there was about 18 of them. That's all. Things like immigration, things like coining money, things like creating an army and a navy, things like interstate commerce and trade, those kinds of things. There were about 18 of them. And the founders, when they created this government, they wanted to make sure that the government understood that they were creating, that you have this small little garden to hoe in. It's got these 18 things. All this big garden belongs to the states. So you hoe in your little garden and stay out of our garden. That was their thinking. And in the amendments that they said, they weren't to delegate liberty or freedom because those things are not delegated by government. They're given by God. But when they set that up, it was like they said, to make sure you understand that when it comes to these fundamental things, you don't mess around in them. For example, the First Amendment to the Constitution says Congress shall make no law, none, zero, no law. When it comes to a man speaking his mind, when it comes to religion and the establishment of it and the free exercise of it, you stay out of that. The Second Amendment, the same thing. You stay out of that. The Ninth Amendment, all the rights that we enumerated came from original rights called common law before the Constitution was ever written. And the Ninth Amendment says the people retain all those as well. And of course, the 10th Amendment says what I said about the gardens. You have a small garden, stay in it. We will never give up the sovereignty of states. That was their thinking. So they created these 3 branches, and they wanted to make sure that if a federal judge said something, it was not law. If the President of the United States gave an executive order, that should only affect the executive branch of government, by the way. It was not law. They also made a vertical separation of powers. The sovereignty of the states was superior. The federal government was inferior. That was the plan. Well, the topic must have come up. What do you do when a judge tries to make law? What do you do if the president tries to make law? What do you do if Congress passes a law that is not constitutional? Well, they must have discussed it because they talked about it. Let me tell you what they said. In Marbury versus Madison, they said, this was in 1803, by the way, they said, a law repugnant to the Constitution is void. In an ex parte with Siebold in 1879, this is what they said. An unconstitutional law is void and is as no law. An offense created by it is not crime. A conviction under it is not merely erroneous, but is illegal and void and cannot be used as a legal cause of imprisonment. In Norton versus Shelby County, they said in 1886, an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights, it imposes no duties, it affords no protection, it creates no office, it is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. In Miranda versus Arizona in 1966, this is what they said. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rule making or legislation which would abrogate them. When Thomas Jefferson was talking about the Kentucky Resolution of 1798, this is what he said. Whensoever the federal government assumes undelegated power, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. He added, where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the remedy. That every state, that's our state, that every state has a natural right and duty in cases not within the authority of the Constitution to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of powers by others within their own state boundaries. That's what they said. Well, that played real good for about the first 100 years, and then slowly the federal government began to run tentacles out of their garden into ours. So I want you to understand, this bill does not force the legislature to nullify anything. This bill simply says, if you're going to, this is how you do it.
All of our elected state officials take an oath to uphold the U.S. and state Constitution, but Bud Halsey is one of the few to understand what it requires to uphold it and has proven his willingness to act. If only more in our state and country had his knowledge of and passion for the Constitution, we would be so much better off. But this is not the only issue Bud led the fight on. He's pushed for using gold and silver as legal tender in Tennessee as the Constitution authorizes. He fought to end the use of eminent domain for so-called blighted areas and called for increased compensation for property owners when eminent domain is used for airport expansion. He also fought against real ID and digital currency. He led the fight to protect the investments of citizens whose accounts were subject to the UCC, which is Uniform Commercial Code. He was a champion for the Constitution and the people. He's a Christian and a patriot, and his absence will be felt in a large way when the next session begins. I've been honored to know him and work with him on certain bills, and very glad to have had him on the show a few different times. Enjoy retirement, Representative Halsey. You very much deserve it, but you will be missed. God bless you. And that wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at teeninformer.tv.com. TV@gmail.com. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Our goal is to have 1,000 subscribers. We haven't quite made it. The good news is we only need about another 30 or so. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do and share us with your friends. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Monty Fritz will be speaking before and after services at the Remnant Revival Church on May 22nd. The services run from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. It's located at 768 Forest Retreat Road in Hendersonville, Tennessee. We are still debating on whether or not to have a show on Memorial Day, but if we do, it will be in regards to the sacrifices made by the fallen. Just remember, it is not about cookouts and camping. And know that for those who have lost family or friends in the service of the country, every day is Memorial Day. Please take the time to check out our other shows brought to you by West Tennessee TV by going to myparistv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show and Sportscast with Jeremy Buckalow. Tomorrow on the Mike Weatherford Show, Mike welcomes back to the program Martin Groves and Steve Causey to discuss new Bigfoot evidence as well as the plans for the next big town hall event in Cadiz, Kentucky, taking place on Saturday, June 13th. Be sure to tune in to find out more. simply go to the My Paris TV channel here on YouTube tomorrow at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. Sunday, June 7th, Sportscast with Jeremy Bucklew returns with a special episode all about sports photography. That will most certainly be an interesting show. And again, just go to My Paris TV here on YouTube. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.